Ash lay in the seams of the city like sorrow in an old man's laugh, fine as flour and quick to rise when footsteps disturbed it. The sound of brooms against stone was the new music of King's Landing. The scrape of 100 hands clearing a path while the corpse of the old order cooled. Above it all, dragons circled. One great shadow that glided over the broken teeth of the Red Keep and another that skimmed lower, fond of the heat that still breathed through the ruins. When the dragon shadows passed, men and women looked up, hands to brows against the sun, measuring fear against gratitude, wonder against weariness. It was a habit now, like dividing a loaf with care, like waiting for orders, like remembering the names of the dead. Jon rode without the usual fanfare. There were no trumpets to announce him, no banners stitched with wolves or dragons. He did not want the city to hear him coming. It had heard enough. His cloak was singed from a fire that had caught in a wagon of lamp oil the night before, and the horse beneath him was more bone than flesh, ribs writing their own prayer under a hide mottled with soot. But men bowed as he passed, and women pulled their children close and touched a hand to their hearts. And, in a dozen languages, people murmured blessings or supplications or simple, exhausted good wishes. Beside him, walking with the even stride that had once carried him across frozen plains and along castle corridors, Grey Worm kept pace. He had left his helm with the rest of the burden he carried and wore his scars in the open air. He watched without turning his head, without moving his hands from where they rested lightly on spear and sword. The city had learned to read his silence. The city had learned to count the dragon's shadows. The dragon pit stood like a jeer at the end of the road, half collapsed, half stubborn. Within, under the vaulted ribs of its ruin, they were waiting. Lords and ladies scoured of silk and jewels, knights with a new, tight way of holding themselves, sailors whose tattoos peered out like squid from the collars of stitched shirts, a few white-haired maesters with soot blackening the grease in their hair, and in the middle of it all, the woman who had come on a wind of ash and ghosts and chosen not to burn them all. Daenerys stood with her palms open to the light, and the light touched the pale inside of her wrists the way sunlight touches a sail. Her hair was near white where it clasped her skull in braids. The rest lifted when a breath of air wandered in through the shattered dome. Drogon had made a nest of the broken stone behind her, eyes half-lidded, smoke whispering at the corners of his mouth as if even the dragon dreamed of another age. He watched Jon through the veil of his sleep. "You came," she said when Jon stopped before her. That was all. Not the words everyone had expected, not a claim or a command. The city listened. The lords listened. The Unsullied stood a little straighter. Tyrion, half-hidden, measured faces the way a carpenter measures timber. Silently, tapping in his mind for hollows where rot had set in. "I said I would," Jon answered. His voice made almost nothing of the space. It had a winter hush, and the ruin swallowed it. And he spoke again, louder, as if offering it to more than the woman in front of him. "We cannot leave the city wondering. Not another night. We cannot," she said, and the words weighed far more than her frame. "The wheel will be broken," I told them. "It is a promise that deserves witness." He had heard those words before and had feared the ruthlessness in them. Now, looking at her, he thought of what they carried beyond iron and fire. She meant to break the wheel because she meant to stop the city from turning in the rut it had ground for itself. All the old spokes, gold and betrayals, vendetta, inheritance, indifference, had rolled over them into graves, and she would sooner shatter than be another spoke. She extended a hand, and he took it. The dragon's breath lifted a curl of ash between them. "Together, then," she said, and the world shifted. It did not lurch. It did not flare. It moved with the same inevitability as the tide. They did not kneel beneath those old melted swords. The throne was a twisted relic in a torn room, more wound than seat. They stood on the broken floor of the dragon pit, where the bones of old beasts had once rattled like dice, and they named aloud what they would be. Not king above queen or queen above king, not lord above lady or chosen above born, but two who had known the world's ice and fire and meant to keep their people from burning or freezing again. Jon could feel the words slipping into place as if the air had been holding a space for it. Co-rulers, twin crowns, equal sovereigns bound not by marriage. That would come in its time if it came, but by pledge. He spoke a vow to the realm, not to the woman alone, and she mirrored it, and those listening understood the weight of a thing that had never been. Grey Worm watched the faces. Tyrion watched the hands. Davos watched Daenerys' mouth, as if the sea had taught him to read the weather like that. Sansa stood at the edge of a ragged arch, the north in her dress, her hair the color of late autumn leaves about to let go. She could not look at her brother without thinking of the boy who had once tied her hair into a knot as a jest and then stood outside her door apologizing through the wood until she forgave him. She could not look at the woman beside him without counting the dead in her mind. She counted one more than the truth, for the woman was not the woman she had feared, and fear and habit make poor mathematicians. Tyrion cleared his throat as if addressing a lecture hall and not a wound in the world. "My lords," he began, and then, nodding toward those who wore no colors but the city's dust, "and my friends who keep no lord but the day before them and the next aft, are that, you ask what shape the morning will take. We answer in deeds you can inspect, not the soft coins of promise. This city will be rebuilt, not as a bauble to ornament a crown, but as a place to live in and to live for. The fields will be seeded, the docks will be cleared, the granaries will be opened under watch. There will be trials, not purges. There will be pardons broad enough for those who weren't architects of ruin, but not so wide as to excuse architects who traded blood for coin. The North," Sansa said, and her voice did not shake, "has earned the right not to be spooled again around a southern hub. We came when the night rose. We bled when the world froze. Our loyalty is not for sale or for guilt, and it will not be assumed like a rent. If you would have our fealty, let it be a covenant, not a shackle." Jon inclined his head. He had been braced to receive the words like a blade. They slid instead like a key. He had worn black among men who wore no color but the love of their duty, and he had learned that duty grew not from command but from choice. "Lady of Winterfell," he said. He would not say sister here. He would not lean on the soft rope of blood when hard rope had bound them all. "You speak for your people as you always have. Take then the pact you asked for. The North holds its laws and chooses its lords, and it owes fealty to a crown that will not ask for what it is not owed. Send harvest south when you have grain, and riders when winter comes again. Keep your own guard. Sit at our council. Let the North be the North and the realm be the realm, and let us not be strangers when we meet." Sansa watched Daenerys, not Jon. The Dragon Queen's face did not change, but her nodded assent did not feel like reluctance wearing the mask of wisdom. It felt like wisdom itself. "I have ruled a city you would have called a foreign word a year ago," Daenerys said. "I learned what it costs to take freedom by force and the cost of asking the free to give it back. If we are to build a house with many rooms, the rooms must not be bricked up in fear of each other. Let the North stand. Let Dorne sit as it loves to sit, on the edge of the table, watching us all with its desert eyes. Let the Iron Islands lash their boats to the pier when they like and run ahead of a storm when they must, so long as they do not prey on those who have nothing left to lose. Let there be more banners, not fewer. The wheel breaks gentler that way." Grey Worm's eyes flicked to her when she said it. He remained expressionless, but Tyrion saw the way his hands relaxed by the smallest notch, like the beginning of a door opening in a house long locked. A murmur ran around the dragon pit, measuring the room. The Reach, what was left of it, muttered about grain. The Riverlands, whose stones remembered every war like a litany, approved with the guarded enthusiasm of a man who has learned to applaud with one hand and keep the other on the hilt. The Vale, under Lord Royce, gave a nod that meant the words had met iron in his mind and rung soundly. Dorne's new paramour, sharp as a thorn, eyes oil-dark, no one quite certain whose blood she wore besides her own, tilted her head, reckoning what mischief and justice might flower in this soil. "Your Grace," said a voice, thin and precise in the old way of men taught under archways. "And your Grace." The new High Septon had the look of a plank long smoothed by hands, not so much humble as worn. "The faith must ask what this arrangement means for vows. There is the matter of—" He glanced at their hands, which did not rest one atop the other, and then at the dragon making smoke behind them. Not fear, Tyrion noted, not this man, but calculation of how to keep the peace. For the unions of blood and oath. It might have been the moment to ask where the faith had been when kings burned cities and princes burned women. It might have been the moment to take a tongue in front of a crowd. Daenerys did not love the faith and it did not love her, but she understood the difference between vengeance and cement. We will not marry until the realm asks it of us and the realm can bear it, she said. No one flinched at the offense avoided. Many were grateful to be spared the need to pretend. We make no demand upon sanctuaries. We ask the faith to do what it has claimed as its purpose, to remind kings and queens that they are mortals who will be judged. And punished? The Septon asked dryly, and the ghost of a smile touched his mouth and left. Judgment without consequence is a breeze in a sermon hall. And taught, Jon said. It is the North's custom to train the young to bear what they mean to carry. We will sit a time at the feet of those who have tended the wounded and the poor here these months. We will learn our city. The High Septon bowed, and in the oblique way of men who have learned to survive weathers, signaled his acceptance. After the vows were spoken and the words bound under sky and ruin, Daenerys stepped forward, palm up. Drogon lifted his head and came to her side, a cat in a nightmare, moving with terrible grace. She set her hand on the ridge of his brow and felt the old thrum that had run through her since the day the eggs had cracked at the edge of the world. She felt the second dragon's shadow pass and brought her head around. Regal, scarred and green-black, settled on the scorched lip of the pit. He had returned the night after the bells, wing cracked and eyes bright with the dumb, startling patience of wild things. She had kept him from the city until the Unsullied had mended his fractures with rawhide and splints, and the dragon had tested the new strength against the evening air, throwing screams like spears at the gulls. Now he came because she called and because the city needed to count not one old god but two. Let them see them together, she said softly, for Jon's ear alone. There is comfort in the balance, even among those who hate what we are. You believe that? He asked. He did not take his eyes off the line of knights a little to the left, the ones whose boots were too new, whose hands were as soft as their eyes were hard, men who had been boys a month ago and thought the world owed them a reckoning. I do not know, she admitted, but they will. Belief is a kind of food. Feed them carefully and they may grow straight. He would never speak like that, would never set words in the air and watch them take seed because they were a kind he had cultivated. He respected the truth's poor grain and its power to choke in the throat. Still, he knew the worth of giving his people something to hold. He reached for Regal's jaw, the place where the scales grew smaller and softer, and felt the rumble that meant welcome. It vibrated the broken stone and hummed along the legs of those standing nearest. When he swung onto the dragon's back, a noise rippled through the crowd. Fear, awe, memory, grief. The wolf and the dragons, they thought. The winter boy who rode the green-black storm. The woman whose shadow had burned their city and who chose, this time, to cool its stones. They flew. They did not burn. They skimmed the city and the sea, sweeping low over the docks, where men looked up, mouths open in the crude gratitude of those whose lives depend on tides and winds and luck. They crossed the Blackwater and traced the river inland, and when they returned, they landed in the ash yard of the Red Keep, where new tents had grown like mushrooms after rain. We cannot live here, Daenerys said, looking up at the melted, twisted relic. Not in that room. How could we hold counsel with the memory of that chair watching? How could we sleep under the ghost of that blade? We don't, Jon said. We live where the people do. We sit where the light is good and the smell of cooking comes in from the kitchens and the sound of the street tells us when we are being foolish. Tyrion blinked at him as if the gods themselves had decided to make a point with Jon Snow's mouth. This will annoy all the right people, he said respectfully. I shall arrange it. He arranged it in every small way that counts, in the number of steps from the door to the council table, so that a man in pain could cross without turning his limp into a joke for those who watched. In the angle of the windows so the evening sun warmed the left side of the room last and the north wind could be called through to cool the arguments that heated there. in the mattresses that did not quite match so that when winter came, the sheets could be mended by known hands and not carted off, to linen rooms that smelled of the dead centuries. When the council sat, it sat with the map within reach and the door unbarred and bowls of bean stew within sniffing distance, because hungry men made bad laws. Sansa took her seat at the table with the measured grace of a woman who had stood at other tables and learned to count which chairs were traps. Her gaze met Daenerys's and did not flinch. They were not friends. They were two women who had seen the lengths men went to for a throne and the lengths women were made into when they were used as means. Between them, across the table, lay a long plane of distance. They crossed it in inches. Samwell arrived with ink on his fingers, delighted and flustered and breathless with the sheer number of tasks that had fallen from the sky onto his head. "We need a new city ledger," he said. "Unless you'd like to read the last one through a hatch of moth holes. And a list of the wells that can be made clean fastest. And there are still rats the size of, well, you'd be surprised. And the granaries on Rook Street have to be freed from what used to be grain. Also, Grey Harbor has reported a sickness that turns the whites of the eyes yellow. And it's not the old summer fever, unless it is, and we'll need lemon and clean water and patience, which everyone is short on. And, oh, there's the school." "The what?" Davos asked, brows rising. "The school," Sam said again, calmer. "If we mean to teach those who will govern not to be fools, we must also teach those who will be governed not to be prey. We can call it something less frightening than a school if it eases everyone's stomachs. A hall, commons, a place where a mason can learn numbers past 10 without cutting the toes off his boots." Tyrion smiled. "The hand approves. The man who grew tall on wine approves. The queen who grew tall on flame." Daenerys was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, a slow smile touching her mouth then slipping away. "Teach them to read their own names," she said, "so no one can use their ignorance as a leash." Sam glowed. He was not good at hiding his pleasure. He wore it like a lantern at his belt, and some who had once sneered found themselves warmed by it against their will. Arya came and went as she always had, a wind in the city's alleys and a ghost at its gates. She was seen in the markets learning how to cut a pomegranate without wasting flesh, and in the Seven Swords in teaching a boy who had never held a blade how not to cut his own foot off. She slept in a room over a cooper for 3 nights and then disappeared for a week and returned with a pack full of notebooks with salt in the paper and stories about the shapes of islands to the west that made the boys who carried buckets up the hill stop in the street to listen. She watched her brother across the room and measured the scar of the life he had chosen against the freedom she had taken. She watched the dragon woman and measured the danger in her smile against the discipline in her choices. There was less of a story in restraint, she reflected, but more of a life. Brienne of Tarth wore white again, the oath binding her like a ribbon, visible, sometimes constricting, always true. She drilled the city watch until men cursed her name with respect and lay down on straw and dreamed of not disappointing her in the morning. She stood before Daenerys and bent her knee. "I swore to keep a king's peace once," she said, "and I failed. I will keep the peace of the realm you name between you, and I will keep it in your name, both of you, and if there's a day when you choose the ruin rather than the path, I will stand in the doorway and make you choose me first." Daenerys looked afraid for a heartbeat. Relieved, Jon thought, and the fear passed like a cloud. "We accept that gift," she said. "We understand what it means." There were challenges in those first weeks that had nothing to do with dragons or thrones and everything to do with bread and habit. The bakers wanted grain more than they wanted law. The coopers wanted payment. The sailors wanted a port fit for a world not strangled by blockade. The city wanted a name for itself that did not taste like ashes. Daenerys walked the lanes in a cloak that hid her brooch and the curve of her crown. She bought a bowl of stew from a woman whose ring finger had been lost to a door and sat on a step and ate and listened to a boy spit jokes at his sister, and a man explain why the cost of barley meant he'd need to turn his beer thin unless someone found a way to bring more sacks upriver. Jon listened more than he spoke and spoke with clarity when he did. Old words grown like stones in his mouth, nothing soft or clever about them. "We will do this. We cannot do that now. You will be paid. You will wait. We remember what you did and will not forget it when the time comes to grant charters." He did not know he had learned a language until he found himself speaking it. At night, in the tent where the smell of canvas and river damp threaded a needle through the spices from the nearby kitchens, Daenerys curled into sleep with her back to Jon's chest or flat on her back with her eyes open, staring at the tent's ceiling as if she could read next week in the weave. "When I closed my eyes last night," she told him quietly, "I saw my father's hands. I do not remember them. I remember stories about them. I saw him holding the city by the throat. I saw him old and young and neither. Do men make one choice and become that man forever? Or do 1,000 choices become a sea? And sometimes the tide makes us the shore we did not mean to be. I don't know." He would not make a new coin from an old answer. "I know what I see now. And what is that? You keeping your own hands from the throat of what you want. You letting the city breathe even when it hurts. That is a choice." She turned her head. Her hair had grown. She wore it braided back, but a curl escaped each night, a ransom she could not pay to order. She pressed her forehead to his jaw. "I am afraid that if I let go, the city that was will take me back. It is like a tide," you said. "Then we fasten lines," he said. "We put our wrists through the loops and tie them so tight we cannot pull them out by habit." "What are the loops?" Her voice was small, not girlish, only human. It startled him that he could still be startled, that she could still have softness. "People," he said. The lines held. Not always, not easily, but often enough. The first true test came across the water on a brisk wind that smelled of gum and blood. A Volantene ship appeared in the mouth of the Blackwater, flying a white flag over scarlet, and the name whispered through the city and along the docks where the tide licked the pilings like a dog tasting an old wound. The Triarchs had something to say. Davos stood on the pier and rubbed salt into his palm and spat thoughtfully into the river. "Men who have done wrong dress their asks in the smoothest cloth," he said. "Let's see how much silk they carried in and whether they expect us to pay for the bolts." The embassy was the color of oranges and knives. Malako Sar Valash, the Triarch with beard rings of pearl and onyx, bowed the way a man bows to a god he thinks might trip. He did not look at the dragons. He did not look away. "Queen, King," he said in careful comment. "Volantis offers friendship with the new order. It is easier to be friends when interests align. You have lost the trade you made when men were commodities," Daenerys said, not cruelly. "It would be a new habit, this calling of truths without making them into cudgels. You will not regain it so long as we live." Malako's smile did not waver. "Your city burned slaves in pits for entertainment," he said. "Your hand now says he will allow no man to ease a ledger with a whipping post. Both things can be true while we are friends. Volantis will send food and ships and masons who know how to raise stone fast if you allow Volantis to buy passage and protection from pirates and free raiders on your coasts." Jon felt the way Grey Worm watched not the emissary, but the men who had come with him. Their hands, their feet, the way swords hung at their sides and whether they were meant for display or use. He learned in that quiet a lesson many never learn: to attend to the edges of a thing and not only its gleaming face. "Protection from pirates we already forbid," Tyrion said. "And we intend to keep the law, not sell it. But if you mean escorts into port, and fair taxes and safe harbor, and dockage at honest rates, we can be as enthusiastic as you could wish. There will be no slaves working those docks. And no press gangs filling ships when your young do not fancy the sea," Malako murmured, testing the ropes for fray. "There are more ways to buy a man than with coin, and more ways to sell him than in chains," Daenerys said. "We will root them out in time. You can help by not offering to build us markets that look like hospitals. We are not as tired as we look." Malako laughed. It was a true laugh. He was not a fool. He could be an enemy later, but he could also be useful now. "Then let us begin by paying our way," he sighed. Dee and Davos ended the meeting with a handshake that meant little across language and much through skin. Peace is a craft, not a miracle. The harbor filled with ships whose captains had traveled with an eye to the risk of dragon fire and an ear to the rumor that this was a new time to do business. The streets filled with voices that had not been heard in a year. Men selling copper pots without dents. A woman offering candles that did not smell like tallow. a boy selling a miracle of bread with a crust like a song. The Unsullied patrolled without swagger, and the City Watch learned to copy their quiet. There were skirmishes, of course. A man whose sister had burned dragged an Unsullied into an alley. Men whose pay had been promised to them by a lion who no longer had a mane tried to collect with knives. The law did not blink. There were trials, and afterward, a new place of punishment that did not look like a stage. There were sentences served under watch rebuilding walls, and there were gallows for those who thought killing a child would fix a record kept in their heads. Word ran north and died in the snow and rose again. The north sent its emissaries and its judgment. Sansa came back and forth, and her maester, a woman with hands like whittled driftwood, took fevers in her stride and wrote to Winterfell about tinctures and grain. If the north was its own, it was still kin. Bran did not often leave the Godswood at Winterfell, but his birds did. They lit on ruined towers and on the shoulders of men who kept their faces polite and their eyes calculating. He wrote once, "The river looks muddied but flows true. Beware the men whose boots are clean after a long walk." Daenerys read it and looked at the men whose boots were clean and learned them by name. Jon read it and made a point of wearing dirt into every place where the city bent toward mirrors. Yara Greyjoy arrived with her ship's planks creaking under the weight of real gifts. Tar, cordage, dried fish packed so clever the stink barely escaped. "The sea knows when a wind changes," she said, clapping Jon's shoulder, clapping Daenerys's, and grinning at the sight of Tyrion trying not to be obvious about standing on a crate to meet her eyes. "It blows like it means to blow this way a while. Let us not be fools and try to spit into it. You've no taste for raiding. Good. Fewer noses broken in taverns. We'll run the salt line and make sure your southern coasts don't wake to find their cattle turned into smoked jerky." "What do you want in return?" Tyrion asked, wolf smile narrow. "To be left to our own boredom," Yara said. "And a word in the council when the river folk and the desert folk and the mountain folk forget that their arguments make little sense to those of us who live with the horizon as a wall." She had more to say to Daenerys when they were alone. "My queen was a sister with salt in her hair," she said, eyes hard. "She wasn't a good queen. She liked to crack bones underfoot like shells. But she'd have liked you now. She'd not have liked you before. That's not praise. That's a warning. We like you better now. Don't set fire to the sea between us. It's hard to put that out." "I will not," Daenerys said, and it was a promise born new each day. The threat did not come first from Volantis or the Iron Islands. It came from men who had built their lives on the idea that nothing could change. They made a banner that looked like a star drawn with a child's careful hand and called themselves the Starry Company, because everything that names itself wants a star. They stole food and then said the stealing had been an inspection. They cut the hair of women who had once cheered dragons and called it penance. They gathered in the covered market, and their leader, a man named Eldrick who had been a Septon's clerk and had learned the power of copying over truth, declared that the realm could not be led by a union that broke the rules of blood set down when the world was another shape. They did not name incest. They named abomination, for they knew what words stuck in the throat and made a man angry enough to hit his neighbor. Jon did not send in soldiers. He sent in words. He went to the market, took off his cloak, and stood with Eldrick while the man made his arguments. He waited. When the man raised his fist for a point, Jon did not flinch. When the man pointed at him, Jon nodded. And then Jon said, "I did not ask to be born. I did not make the world in which I was born. I did not know the truth of my name until it had to be spoken in a room where the dead outnumbered the living. What I know is this: we either bind ourselves so tight to rules that we strangle, or we make room to breathe together. The faith has asked us to wait. We wait. The law asks us to do no harm. We do none. If you will argue about a wedding that has not been held, you will grow tired long before I do." Eldrick's eyes flashed. He looked, for a flicker, like a child robbed of a sweet, and then he remembered he was a man with a movement and squared his shoulders. "Words," he said. "Always words. Where are deeds?" "They walk," Jon said. He raised his arm and pointed. At a woman helping a boy drag a bale of straw. At a man hauling stones to fill a gap in a wall. At the Unsullied 2 streets away, standing in the shade while children played near their ankles without fear. They do not need me to gild them. He did not make a speech. He did not leave trailing virtue behind him like perfume. He left with bread in his pocket that he had bought at a stall where the steam rose like hope. Daenerys watched from a doorway where the light cut her in half. He will never be loved by men like that, she said to Grey Worm. Men like that love themselves very much, Grey Worm said. It fills the room. There is less for others. That would have been the end of the Starry Company, the way a candle goes out when a door opens, letting in air tea. Oh, blunt for a small flame, but nothing ends cleanly. There were more small men. They had more ink and more paper. They wrote letters that called the Dragon Queen a witch and the Winter King a bastard with a name wrapped in silk. They passed them around in the night and dropped them in water buckets when the city watch came by. When the time came to show iron, Brienne led the watch through the market like a shepherd with a stick, and when Eldrick rose to strike, she caught his wrist. It was not elegant. It was not glorious. It was the sort of moment that never gets written into songs. She held his arm while he struggled and grew tired and learned that his body was a less reliable friend than he had believed. She did not strike him. She did not break his bone. She simply held. "What will you do with me?" Eldrick asked, breath heaving. "We will feed you," Brienne said. "We will listen to you. We will not obey you. If you strike again, we will put you in a cell where the light is small, and we will let you think. It is a punishment not much used. Men hate it, though it leaves them unbroken. Some men," Tyrion muttered, watching, "others would find it an improvement." Jon watched, too, and thought of another cell, another time, and the way light looks through a narrow opening. He had learned then that he was not the man he thought he was. He wondered who Eldrick might learn he was in the dim. He wondered who he himself would be in a year of quiet. In the 4th month after the Day of Vows, the Triarch's ship sailed again, not white over scarlet but yellow over black. This was the flag that meant mercenaries, and it smelled not of oranges and knives but of steel and elephants. In their hunger, in their pride, in their fear of a new market making them poor, men in Volantis had hired the Golden Company's remnants, a beast with head half chewed off that still bit. Their captain was a man whose eyes had once been a clear, light gray and were now the color of melted hoarfrost. His name in this life was Jorhan Pike, though he had worn others before. He had 20 ships fast enough to be a promise and slow enough to be bait. His letter, delivered to the quay on a spear shaft, bore a certain charm, if you liked that sort of charm. "We come to make right the wrongs done to honest men whose goods were taken by a government declaring yesterday a sin. We come to collect for those whose money purchased nothing. If the city prefers to avoid the sort of justice paid for in fire and pitch, the city must settle accounts." "Ah," Tyrion said, spinning the letter with one finger. "The old way of a late bill. Send muscle and a smile. How delightful to be treated like a tavern, not a nation. They think we do not know what we are," Daenerys said, rereading the letter until the words made less sense than a child's game. "They think we will answer coin with coin or steel with steel without choosing the ground." Jon put a finger on the map. "They'll come up the gullet," he said. "We can set traps there, but they've got men who've run that route since they were boys. If we take them in the river, it will be as a kindness to the fish. No, we don't meet them at our door. We meet them in open water, with a wind they don't expect. We haven't ships enough to make that work," Davos said, matter of fact. It was the sort of thought men did not like to speak aloud. He spoke it like a man touches a wound to see if it needs stitching. "They do, even with 20. Their decks are crowded and our ships run light. We don't fight ship to ship," Jon said. He turned to Daenerys. His face was still as part of a shore. "We use the dragons, but we don't burn the men. We burn the wind." You could see the temptation flash behind her eyes like a fish in shallow water. She had burned ships before. She had loved it in the way any wild creature loves the certainty of its own power. She did not love what the city would think when its people saw new fireworks over their river. "If I take Drogon high," she said slowly, "and you take Regal lower, we can make walls of heat. The wind will play in the alley between them. You mean to push their sails where we want them?" Davos's grin was sudden and boyish. "Ah, that is a trick I would pay to see," he said. "A fine bit of thievery from the gods. If you can do it, we can herd that lot into a shoal where they'll bump and complain and look ridiculous, and then we can choose which ones to tackle like gentlemen." Arya, leaning her hip against the table, traced a line with one finger. "And while all of you are busy playing with the sky," she said, "I'll teach their captain that letters written on spear shafts have a way of splintering." "You can't kill him in his bunk," Sansa said without heat. "It will look like we found it easier to cut one throat than keep one vow." "I can kill him in a duel," Arya said, not pretending to be reasonable. "Or I can kill his reputation. It's the same thing." "Kill his reputation first," Daenerys said. "If it rises from the grave, then we'll see." She flew with joy for the first time in a year, not because she hated those beneath her, but because she loved what air could be. Drogon climbed and climbed until even the gulls were only white thoughts too slow to keep up. The sea laid itself out below like a pelt. Regal lurked below them, sly and heavy. Jon's hands on the ridges had learned the language of this dragon's fearlessness, as different from Drogon's arrogance as a good dog from a wolf who has learned to tolerate men. They moved as they had said they would. They made a canyon of heat that bent the wind. The first ships fought their rudders as men do who have forgotten that wood listens, and the second line found themselves with sails bellied as if giants had crouched under the canvas and shoved. A cheer rose from the city's walls when the ships scud sideways in a loose, comic stagger. It rose high. Gur when an elephant on the deck of the third ship trumpeted, sensing heat, and then sat down with dignity and refused to stand. Men cursed the animal and each other. Ropes tangled. Two masts kissed and snapped. It should have felt like a toy, the way the pieces toppled and clattered. Felt like a lesson in gravity. Davos's fleet, his fleet now. The city had made him a lord of a new sort, and he had accepted with an expression like someone offered a fine pair of boots that pinched. Came out from the shelter of the point with a speed that made men on the walls swear. Tarred ropes sang. Grapples bit. Men who had been expecting to be burned found themselves hooked like fish and hauled into battles they knew how to fight. It was not pretty, but it was play of a brutal kind, and the city liked watching men who had come to bully be made ridiculous. Jorhan Pike, to give him the name he had purchased for this season, stood on his quarterdeck and squinted up at the heat shimmer weaving above him like snakes. "There is a woman up there," he said, "and a man below. I hired my men to fight a man, not the air." "You can fight gravity when you've paid back your debt?" Arya said, stepping out from behind the coil of rope at his elbow, as if she had been waiting in the ship's shadow all afternoon for this exact line. She was not dressed as a ghost. She was dressed as a sailor who had better things to do. He turned. She showed him her empty hands, then his dagger in them, then nothing in them again. "What are you?" he asked, unnerved, because a man who can run numbers like a bookkeeper has trouble with illusions he cannot count. "A story," she said. It was an indulgence, saying it aloud. She did not often allow herself that. "And an end to your story. Not with blood. Not yet. Here." She held out a paper and watched confusion crawl across his face. It was his own letter, in a new hand, and the ink still wet. The men around him smelled a trick and leaned aside instinctively. "You write well," she said. "Now I've written you back. It says you came and you found the city more clever than you expected, and also kinder, and that you will take your ships and the coin that paid you and you will go hire yourselves out to guard fishermen in the summer sea. It says you have learned that one way to be strong is to refuse ugly work." "That is a lie," he said, but it came out soft. "It is a story that could be true," she said. "You can put your name under it." He read it again. He could not help himself. He was a man who loved ink. He loved its authority. He felt the ship slow under him, felt the pull of the wind he did not understand, felt the fear of the men around him more keenly than the fear of the dragons overhead. He saw in a flash the shape of his future in two versions. One where he took a swing and it ended in rope or fire. One where he pretended he had intended the noble course all along and found that sometimes pretending is the way the body learns emotion so that the mind can believe it. He signed. Arya took the letter and whistled. A small boat bobbed up on the other side. Davos in it, grin sharp as a harpoon. "That went better than I'd hoped," he said. "Shall we call that justice paid in embarrassment? My favorite coin." The city cheered again when the mercenaries hove about. Volantis howled and resolved to try other tricks. It always would. Some cities are rivers, taking the shape of any bed. Some are stones sitting in the river and learning to let the water speak words against them until both are changed. King's Landing was learning to be a stone that knew it was a stone and did not try to pretend it was water. Time moved like a patient animal, scratching itself on the doorpost of the year. There were weeks when Daenerys woke with the taste of blood in her mouth and had to wash her face with cold water until the memory ran off into the basin. There were days when Jon sat in a chair and let men shout at him, and afterward he went out and sat on a step and watched a stray dog sleep in the heat. There were nights when they held each other the way people hold on in storms, and mornings when she braided her hair while he tied his bootlaces, and they spoke of tariffs and of whether the grain was milled too coarse in the South District this month. And it felt like the world was ordinary in the best sense of that word. The city began to show new scars, and not all of them were ugly. A line of trees stood on the hill below the broken keep, planted by children who would never remember the castles as anything but broken. In summer, they made a shade that gathered people together in little rings of gossip and barter, and then in rings of listening while a woman read aloud from a book in which words about law nestled next to poems about the shapes of clouds. The school, Sam would never stop calling it that, and eventually the city stopped pretending to object. Filled with 10-year-olds who argued about how many loaves could be bought with the coin they'd been given, and whether it was fair to expect a baker to make more when he had no yeast, and whether it was an important thing to know what yeast was made of. A man who used to break knees for a lender taught some so clean you could eat off them. A girl who had once been proud of knowing where to pilfer onions learned to draw the way water bends around an obstacle, and then she found work sketching new canals. A sheep's stomach burst in a butcher's shop, and instead of laughing, 3 boys ran to fetch Sam and watched while he mixed herbs with vinegar and saved a boy's life who had been cut in the hand. If there was a moment when Daenerys felt the city tip and say yes to the bargain she had struck with it, it came at dusk in high summer. A storm had passed, clumsy and loud, and left the air lit with the leftover glory of a wind's end. She walked with no crown and a gold clasp at her throat, the only thing the CIT why could call finery. A girl approached with the wary bravery of a cat whose tail has been stepped on too many times. She held out a loaf of bread and then pulled it back and then held it out again and finally pressed it into Daenerys' hands as if handing over something too hot to hold. "For the road," she said, as if this woman was always leaving, a traveler who might be kept by crumbs and kindness. "It's not burned." Daenerys took the bread and tore off a piece and gave it back, and then another, and then handed pieces to everyone standing near enough to pretend they did not want to be part of what was happening. The Dragon Queen tore bread and people took it and chewed and looked at each other and smiled out of the corners of their mouths like men conspiring to do good. When Drogon's shadow rolled over them, no one ducked. They looked up and said his name in a dozen accents, and he landed on the hillside and nosed the new trees and moved on. You cannot have a city without jealousy. If King's Landing had learned to love its own reflection in a new pool, there were still those who thought they looked prettiest in a mirror framed with fear. A cluster of men in the West, Lannister cousins and their associates. Men who had managed to keep 2 rings of gold when their neighbors could barely find shoes, sent letters sewn into flour sacks and smuggled through the mountains. They promised coin to those who would clap again at the sound of swords fixing order. They hinted that a queen with dragons was less dangerous if she were ankle-tied by a king with colder blood. They gambled, in essence, that Jon Snow might be made into a tool with leverage applied at the right point. Sansa opened one of those letters and smiled without mirth. She poured herself wine and sat with Bran under the heart tree, and they let the ravens come and go until Bran's eyes refocused and were brothers again. "Do I write to him?" she asked, "and tell him what's coming, and watch him set his jaw and play it badly? Or do I ride?" "You ride," Bran said gently. "You cannot put your hands on your brother's face with a letter." He had learned to speak in sentences again with those he loved. He still went away often and came back like the tide. The North had learned to count with 2 measures, the hours he was present and the days when his thoughts were elsewhere. The Godswood was always quietly full of him. She wrote. Her guard was smaller than most men would have allowed for a woman of her rank. Brienne was with her, and Podrick, and a half-dozen men who had learned the worth of small numbers used well. The tween hills watched them pass, as hills will. On the road south, Sansa saw a man teaching a boy to set a snare. She saw, in the distance, a shepherd guiding his flock with the patience of a saint. She saw a tree struck by lightning, still smoking, and beneath it the blackened outline of something that had been a fox. She dismounted and stared at the fox until the shape lost its grip on her mind and became ash again. In the city, the Lannister cousins had friends. Petty desk men with smooth fingernails and a talent for turning lines into walls. A few soldiers who had once eaten at a richer table and could not forgive the loss. Women who believed life would be better if it decided to be like a story they had been told as girls. The plot was not clever. They mean to seize the queen when she walked the market. They mean to claim the king's complicity, to draw him into a dance his nature would not allow him to learn. It failed because a boy who sharpened knives at a stall where the metal caught the sun just so had fallen in love with the shape of Daenerys' shadow and followed it to count how it passed over barrels and baskets and bricks. It failed because Grey Worm had learned not to place all his men where the obvious told him to put them. It failed because when the first blade came low, Daenerys did not scream. She stepped into the space she had made by standing on a dozen battlefields, and her hand moved faster than the brain that had ordered the hand, and the blade bit air and then wood. The man who had meant to be a knight grabbed her by the arm and learned what dragon skin feels like when it is made of human rage and training. Brienne's sword was out. Grey Worm's spear was between ribs. A woman screamed. A dog barked. Nobody died who wasn't trying to make someone else die. Daenerys felt her heart thrash and then, slowly, beat again as if it were finding a rhythm it had lost. After, she stood with the would-be knight before the school's door. She did not want a gallows. She wanted a room where shame could be made into something other than silence. "Tell them why," she said to the man. He stared at the ground. A child coughed. "Because I was told," he said finally. "Because I believe that a king is a man, and a king must be obeyed first. Because I lost coin when your men made new laws, and because I thought it would be easier to go back to what I knew. Because I'm a coward, and I wanted to hide in the crowd when everyone cheered the right thing again." She watched his face until the watching hurt him. "And now?" she asked. "Now I know you bleed like a person," he said. He sounded astonished. Men sound astonished when they learn a woman is a person, as if it is a trick pulled on them by a clever witch. "Now I expect to be killed." "You expect wrongly," she said. "For once in your life, you will repair the roof you knocked a slate from when you missed your mark. You will learn numbers at the school until you can read a ledger and make sense of your own desires. You will ask the men who sent you to visit you in the market at noon, and you will point at me and tell them that I am alive because you were clumsy at murder and lucky at repentance. If they fail to come, we will consider their manners. Go." He went, and the children at the school told the story for a month with an increasing number of ridiculous details. In one version, the man tripped over a cat that was Drogon in disguise. In another, he slipped on a melon that had rolled under his foot with gleeful malice and then rolled away laughing. Even lies can be useful when they make the truth easier to sing. Sansa arrived 2 days later and kissed her brother's forehead and, after a breath, kissed Daenerys' cheek. There was a second breath after that. "I will help you keep the realm," she said finally, and they heard in the sentence what she did not say. "And I will help keep you, too, if you earn it." She handed Jon a letter with the seal broken. He read it with his mouth set. Tyrion read it over his shoulder like a rat in a larder. "We can answer with law and noise," Tyrion said. "Noise to drown their whispers, law to drown their teeth. We answer with light," Daenerys said, "and with a piece of iron." "What piece?" Sansa asked, interested despite herself. "A charter," Daenerys said. "Not the scribblings of a man in a wine-sour study meant to give a king cover for doing what he wants. A charter with stakes in the ground, what a ruler can do, what a ruler cannot, what the people can hold us to. If I had had such stakes, there are nights I think—" She stopped. Jon finished it for her, not to spare her, but because he owed himself the truth, too. "I would have struck against them anyway," he said gently. "Or maybe, because the stakes tell you where the edges are, you would have stopped because your hand learned the edge. Edges are kindness, she said. She looked at Sansa. Will you write with us? Yes, Sansa said. The word was a gift placed on the table, heavy and bright. Sam wrote with the haste of a man who loves what he does. Tyrion wrote with the care of a man who has paid for cleverness before and is wary of its bills. Davos contributed by saying, at crucial moments, will that make sense to a man who has to fish at dawn? And crossing out things that wouldn't. Brienne suggested a line that said the City Watch could never again be bought wholesale, and that if it tried it would be considered treason not only by the law but by the Guild of Mothers. To everyone's surprise, this passed without argument. Grey Worm added one detail, that soldiers would have the right to refuse an order that asked them to do something that would make them ill for the rest of their lives. It was written in cleaner language than that, but that was its heart. The High Septon read and rubbed his nose and then nodded, slowly, as if permitting himself to be convinced. It became known as the Hill Charter because the first copy was read aloud on the slope under the new trees. The words were plainer than men expected and harder. They did not say men have the right to be happy. They said men have the right not to be ground into meal for someone else's bread. They said the crown could not seize property without cause and could not make cause by simply saying it. They said the city owned its water and its air. It said the people owned their bodies. It said there would be elections for certain posts that had always been passed from uncle to nephew. It said that if a king or queen broke these words, there would be trials that would make even kings or queens sweat. Will it last? Jon asked that night in the tent. Do horses last? Daenerys said, some do, some fall on the road. What matters is that the next foal knows how to run. We've taught the next one to run a little straighter. There were seasons. There were small wars around the edges, the sort you cannot avoid unless you mean to let your edges be eaten away like bread left out for birds. There were men who tried again and again to make the city a story they understood. There were men who were surprised to find that this city preferred to tell itself a new story. There were births and there were deaths, and there was a winter that came early and stayed late. And when the spring finally broke through, the young trees on the hill leafed out with a stubbornness that made the children laugh. News came sometimes like a stone thrown from very far. A boy in the Vale who had grown into a man and discovered that his lungs were less reliable than his ambition. A woman in the Reach who gathered the scraps of old houses and sewed them into a new thing that looked like a banner and had no sigil but bread and a plow. A priest in the West who said the gods have been watching this whole time and seem, frankly, amused. These things found their way into the city's nights and gave people something to talk about besides their own hunger and the price of oars. And then there was a letter from beyond the sea, from a city where every other word is a bargain. It carried a seal Jon did not at first recognize and then remembered in a strange, twisting way from a night when he had tried to speak to a dragon across a space of cold. The Citadel, in its terrible courtesy, invited the co-rulers of the realm to send a representative to discuss the possibility of recording the events of the last years in a book that would not be purely ruin. Sam read it twice and laughed. Then he packed a bag. You cannot help yourself, Gilly said, and kissed his forehead. You're happiest when diagrams are being drawn. Tyrion stood with Jon at the foot of the gangway, watching the ship bob like a living thing. Do you think, Tyrion said out of nowhere, that we have done enough people would forgive us if we failed tomorrow? No, Jon said. He was not being cruel. That's not how forgives work. That's not how failure works. We have done enough that, if we failed tomorrow, the people who live here would know how to begin again. Tyrion considered this and nodded. That is close, I think, to the only answer that holds. They did not marry that year. They did not marry the next. When at last they spoke their vows under the new leaves and the old go. DS and the seven faces and a sky that was a blue you wanted to drink, it was because the city had learned to breathe without holding itself tight, and the North had made peace with calling kin something other than a rope, and the Faith had put in its book a long note about the difference between sin and harm. The High Septon forgot his lines and laughed and said, It is enough, I think, to see what we all see. And everyone agreed that for once a man of the cloth had said something true in 10 words or less. They tried to have children. The gods, who are sometimes busy and sometimes asleep and sometimes reading over a carpenter's shoulder because it is more interesting, did not send one. They stopped trying with a certain patient sorrow and found that their hands had begun to reach for each other without thought. Like a man reaching for his knife when he hears something at the door and then realizing it is only the cat. They made of their city a place a man could walk at noon without fear and a woman could sit with a book without someone knocking it from her hand. They made of their council a thing that did not always work but often did. And when it did not work, they did not pretend it had. They made of their dragons not a threat but a possibility, used rarely like a very sharp tool in a careful hand. Regal loved the North more and took to hunting in the pines when they flew there. Drogon loved the cliff at Dragonstone and the way the wind hit his wings there. Once, he lifted a whale calf out of the shallows and laid it back in deeper water and snorted at his own generosity like a king relenting after a comedy. People told that story to each other for years. In their 5th year on the hill, a drought turned the river mean and slow. In their 6th, a fever came from the south with a bright rash and a quick way of turning a day into ash. In their 7th, a fleet came from far past the summer islands holding men who had never seen snow and whose eyes widened at the sight of dragons, as if they had always known such creatures existed only in paintings. They came because Arya told them there was a city where a woman had taught a would-be murderer to put down his knife and pick up a ladder. They stood under the trees and clapped at the sight of a child showing off the numbers he knew. Daenerys grew older in a way she thought she would not. There were lines where there had not been. There were days when her shoulder ached, an indignity. There were mornings when she woke and, before she opened her eyes, she lay in that quiet the way a patient waits for a physician's touch, asking herself if the day would be difficult or merely full. She allowed herself, sometimes, to remember the days when she had thought the only person who could save the world was a child with fire in her belly. She did not hate that child. She knew exactly why the child had thought that, and she knew what it had cost to teach the woman to put that fire under a kettle and heat a house. Jon did not grow much more talkative. He grew surer of the words he did choose to speak, as a craftsman becomes sure of his hands. He learned to smile like a man who has not forgotten winter but has learned to leave the door open to the kitchen while he eats. He kept watch in the ways he understood, which were not less valuable for being old. He rose early. He put his hand on Regal's neck and felt the pulse that meant the world was still a place where creatures breathed and did not stop because a man asked them to. He walked the streets and listened to the way people said each other's names. There was a time when rumors rose that a prince from the east had married a dragon who was not a dragon and would come to claim the realm because he had once been promised a crown in a tent. Daenerys read it and snorted at the memory of tents. Jon read it and said nothing. They waited for the rumor to ripen into fact. It never did because most rumors are small, shrill birds that die when they cannot find a seam in the house to nest in. On the anniversary of the day they stood in the dragon pit and spoke their new words, they went to sit among the people on the slope under the trees. They did not make speeches. They did not hand out coins. A girl who had once handed bread to a queen handed flowers to a woman in a white cloak. A boy recited a poem that used the word dragon too many times. A man who had once tried to kill a queen finished the roof he had started 5 years ago and stepped down and looked at it with the helpless awe of someone who has done a thing he did not know he could do. The wind shifted. Regal lifted his head and huffed. Drogon unfurled a wing and caught the air and then folded it with the deliberation of a king standing after a long meal. Jon put his hand out. Daenerys took it. It had become a habit, this exchange of weight and warmth. It had also become their prayer. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. She meant the clean certainty of the old crusade, the singular path that burns all forks, the burn that comes with believing the world can be solved. "Not anymore," he said. He looked around. At children whose game involved not killing but pretending to build a bridge with stones. At men who had learned to argue with their hands empty. At a woman whose hair had gone white while she taught boys to write their names. "Me neither," she said. She leaned against his shoulder and watched Drogon watching them. Old and not old. A creature worth fearing who had learned the piece of nails digging at itchy scales. "What will they say about us when we are gone?" "That we were people," he said. It was not modesty. It was the truest honor he knew. That we made mistakes and fixed some of them. That we were afraid and did it anyway. "They will say we broke a wheel," she said. smiling in that half-mocking, half-loving way she had of speaking about herself. Years from now, some child will ask his teacher whether a wheel can be broken, and the teacher will sigh and tell him to sit down. They will say you taught them to set it on its side and roll children down a hill on it, he said, and she laughed aloud, the sound catching like a spark and then settling warm in the crowd. He felt, in the bones of the day, the way a city can be a home and not a throne, the way a dragon can be a neighbor, the way a queen's hand in yours can mean less about power and more about breath. He felt the world move, not lurching into destiny, not rushing toward ruin. He felt it shift like a great creature turning over, careful not to crush the small things sleeping in its shadow. Night fell. The stars came out, more modestly than the men who had named themselves after them. There were more lanterns in the city now than there had been before, but they were fewer in the Red Keep. The dark there felt honest. They lay down and listened to the gusts and creaks that make up the night, and Daenerys spoke a single word into the quiet, and Jon answered it with a hand on her shoulder. They slept, and the city, listening the way cities do, led them. When trouble came again, and it always does, it came in the thump of hooves on the road to the west, and the sound of trumpets that had not been blown in a long time, and the sight of banners that had not been ironed yet from where they had been kept folded under beds. But there were men and women who knew where the shutters stuck and how to pull them clear. There were boys who had learned to set a break and men who had learned to bake bread when the baker was ill. There were dragons on the cliffs and a king who had learned to say no and a queen who had learned to say wait. They rose with the city and answered, as they had learned to answer. Not with fire first, not with fear, not with vows they could not keep. They answered with the hard, slow art that had saved more kingdoms than swords. The art of keeping their hands open while guarding the door. And the city and the hills and the river and the children, who do not care what you call your government so long as it feeds them and lets them sleep, watched and ate and slept and grew in the shadow and the shelter of what had been built. Years later, enough years to make the children of the school old enough to be bored by politics and interested in wine, Samwell put the last page into the book. He did not write the end. He wrote, instead, "This book is shorter than the days it describes, and I have left out more than I have put in. If you want to know what mattered, ask the woman who sells bread on the corner. Ask the man who tends the dragon's shed scales and keeps them from being pilfered by fools. Ask the children. They remember better than you think." He carried the book up the hill and put it on a shelf that had been built by a boy with quick hands and a girl with a better eye. He went outside into a dusk that had not noticed, and he stood under the trees that had once been saplings and were now confident. A dragon passed overhead, and he did not flinch. He waved at it. It made no sense to wave at a dragon. He did it anyway. This too was a kind of prayer. In the house where the rulers slept, Jon woke and listened and knew. In that way you sometimes know when the world is exactly as what it is meant to be for a breath, that he wanted nothing but what he had. Daenerys turned, hair like thread on the pillow, and opened her eyes, and the look on her face when she saw him, still, after all this, was not triumph or relief or hunger. It was recognition. It was the world telling its own name. He smiled, and she did, and outside, the city shifted on its stone and breathed. The first scent was bitter almond. Davos turned his head before the others smelled it. A sailor's nose remembering the way air changes when it carries a danger older than names. "Hold," he said low, and the line of men behind him stopped in the torchlit tunnel as if the word had tugged a rope around their chests. Haleen of the Alchemist's Guild, older now, beard gone a dry gray like old tinder, lifted his lamp. "There are caches here the fools never catalogued," he murmured, voice trembling with indignation and delight in equal portions. "Wildfire does not like to be forgotten. It likes it less when it's remembered with clumsy hands," Tyrion said, wiping sweat from his lip with a kerchief that had been clean when they started. "Show us." They had found the entrance behind a collapsed wine cellar, 3 streets south of the ruined September, where the ground had slumped in the Bell's heat and rain had made a new stair of rubble. The tunnel smelled of mold and vinegar. It led to a low chamber bricked up in one age and forgotten in another, then remembered when a rat tunneled where men would not. In the light of Haleen's lamp, a rank of clay jars blinked back, glazed a dull green, mouths sealed with wax, bodies stamped with the stag and seven-pointed star. Some were older, Balerian's years, Helene had said with reverence, stroking a sigil made by a hand long dead. "How many?" Davos asked. "Enough," Helene said, and then, earnestly, "Too many." They brought in teams of boys who swept without breathing and women who tied scarves soaked in vinegar around their mouths and noses. The smell was a lesson in how to live. Brienne stood at the tunnel mouth with a list and a touchstone eye for men whose hands shook. She sent those to the simpler work, carrying buckets of sand, laying down damp canvas. Tyrion walked with Helene up and down the line of jars and made marks on a slate, and for once the act of counting felt like prayer. Daenerys came at dusk, when the air shifted and the heat in the chamber grew less sullen. She stood with her hands behind her back and listened to Helene explain the way wildfire grows angry when it feels the brush of careless thought. Drogon's shadow moved across the cracked ceiling and every torch guttered as if bowing. "We'll move them to the river," Helene said. "One by one, with cradles to keep the clay from striking. Then we drown what should have been drowned years ago." "And the guild?" Daenerys asked. Helene looked at his hands. "We'll keep enough to put out the fires of fool sets," he said. "No more." It did not go without blood. A jar seems split when a cart's will learn the cost of a rut. The oil that is not oil sighed as if remembering a lover and flashed green through the dusk. A boy died with a look of surprise on his face, as if the world had told a bad joke. Brienne pulled two others back by the collars and threw a cloak over the flare with emotion so neat it looked practiced. It wasn't. You cannot practice with wildfire. You can only be brave and ready, and pray that readiness holds. That night Daenerys walked alone to the river's edge and watched the water close over the last jar. The alchemist sang in a thin, reedy line, a song so old even Helene had to search for the notes, and the river took their offering as it takes everything. She stood until the water made a new skin over the place where danger had gone to sleep. "They meant it as a crown," Tyrion said quietly, coming up beside her, hair damp with the air that always hangs over a river at night. All those jars under floors and in cellars. A crown a king could wear without lifting it. She listened to the mud talk beneath the water. "There are always men who think a crown should be a threat," she said. "Let ours be a weight." Across the sea, a different weight shifted. Tycho Nestoris arrived with his collar stiff and his mouth pleasantly surprised by the taste of the pea soup Davos offered at the council table. "Heat catches lies," he remarked, approving of the plain fare and the plain room. "One sweats when one has something to hide." "You'll cool quickly then," Tyrion said. "You keep your paper truths in a city where the fog is polite enough to keep secrets until noon." Tycho smiled without malice and placed a neat packet of vellum on the table. "You owe," he said, making the words sound like a diagnosis rather than an accusation. "War is expensive. People are expensive. The interest is accustomed to its own breakfast and will not thank you if you feed it less than it expects." "We do not deny the debt," Daenerys said, though she felt every coin like grit under her tongue. "We deny the schedule. We'll not turn this city into a purse. Iron bank schedules have been thought inflexible." Tycho folded his hands. "But a schedule is not a god. It is a tool. Tools can be remade." Davos slid a parchment across. "Tariffs on the gullet," he said. "Not enough to turn ships about. Enough to make their captains count. Obsidian from Dragonstone, useful for more than sticking walkers, as it turns out. Sharp tools sell. We won't strip the mountain. We'll quarry and replant the rock, if rock can be said to be planted. And there's the harbor. Dockage fair and clean." "Enforcement?" Tycho asked mildly. "The city watch," Brienne said. "The unsullied, the ironborn along the coast. And if a captain thinks to avoid honest fees by slipping ashore at night, he will find the small folk surprisingly fond of their city's coffers when those coffers pay for bread in winter." She did not smile when she spoke. She did not need to. She had learned how a certain kind of woman looks when lying, and she made sure to look different. Tycho read. He asked questions about the weight of grain and the number of boats a man can empty in an hour if he knows his knots. He inquired politely, not coyly, never coyly. how many casks of wildfire the city carried and how many it intended to carry tomorrow. He took note of the school and the charter. He stared for a moment at the clause granting soldiers the right to refuse a life-ruining order and then, unexpectedly, nodded. The Iron Bank has learned that a man who cannot sleep will spend what he should not, he said. Sleep is good for interest. They haggled. It was a quick haggle because the numbers were the part of the story that meant least to the people in the room and most to the man at the end of the table. When they finished and Tycho had put a tidy ribbon around his packet again, he stood. The bank will accept, he said. It will accept, in part, because this room is less grand than it used to be and the windows open in a way our ledgers approve of. In part because the dragons have chosen to nap rather than roar. In part because, and here he inclined his head toward Grey Worm, your commander looks at me like a man uninterested in bribes. I do not take what I cannot repay, Grey Worm said. An uncommon philosophy. Tycho bowed again. May it spread. It will make us all richer. Traders from Bravos began to come more often. Their ships brought fish packed in ice that made the dockhands' hands burn, and glass that held the light as if it loved it, and songs that counted with different numbers. They brought questions, too, and a few quiet men with quiet faces who walked the city as if they were measuring it for a suit of clothes. Arya watched one of these men for an afternoon from the rooftop of a tannery, moving when he moved, stopping when he stopped, listening to the way air sounds when someone holds his breath. That night she sat on the sill of the window in John's workroom, her boots tapping the stone. They have the smell of the house, she said. John tied a strip of leather around a roll of parchment and looked up. Are you in danger? She smiled without showing teeth. No, I am a story to them that went its own way. They don't tell it often. They don't like stories they didn't end. But someone has paid for them to walk our streets and test our locks. Who? Tyrion asked, putting down a cup of water and wishing it were wine with a longing so habitual it almost did. Not hurt anymore. The bank, to make sure Tycho doesn't become sentimental, Arya said. Or men who fear a charter more than a sword. Or nobody. Some men walk to remind themselves they can. Tell them the way to the school, Daenerys said. If they are going to watch us, let them learn a letter while they do it. Arya laughed. You set them a riddle. They hate riddles. The man with the quiet face attended a lesson the next day and copied his name like a child. He left afterward and did not return. Perhaps he carried the letters like a charm in his pocket. Perhaps he went home and told his employer the city was not as easy as it looked. Perhaps he did nothing at all. The world does not report every small thing it does. Even with new numbers and safer sellers, certain nights still stank of old grief. Grey Worm began to spend those nights on the roof where the tent ropes had once hummed like harp strings in the wind. He would lie on his back and watch Regal cut a dark shape against the stars, and sometimes, when the air was very still, he could imagine the heat of Noth on his face, though he had never been there. He had Missandei's words as a boat to cross on. He had not known you could be homesick for a place that had never let you stand on its sand. One morning he stood before Daenerys while the room was still chewing its bread and the map was quiet. He did not fear her. He feared disappointing something he had wrapped in her shape. We asked to go, he said. He had mastered we years ago. It was a word he would let no one take from him. Not all. Enough. We go to Noth. Daenerys's heart clenched and then let go, as hearts must if they are to do their work. To protect, she said. To keep oaths, he said. No one will take them again. We will make that true or die without shame. You will die if you stay too long, Sam said gently. He was not in the habit of walking into walls, but he would not lie to spare an impact. The butterflies, if they are, as the old books say, their fever kills men who do not share the island's slow breath. We know, Grey Worm said. We know the stories. We will go ashore at dusk and leave at dawn. We will build on the rocks and fish. We will teach those who come after us to tie nets and refuse gifts. We will watch for slavers and set their ships on fire. It is a cruel mercy, Daenerys said, soft. Grey Worm lifted his chin. It is a mercy, he said. I know no other kind except the sort that becomes weakness. I am not a man who can live in this city without thinking of the dead under its stones. I have learned the shape of my days. They are square. Let me lay them where she asked. She put her hand on his shoulder. Felt like putting a stone on a cairn. Go, she said. Take what you need. Take the ships we can spare. Take my blessing. Bring back the story. Yara brought ships and men who knew how to make a harbor appear out of an argument with the tide. She spat into the wind and grinned at Grey Worm and said, I like a man with a plan and no interest in explaining it to me. She rowed them out beyond the sight of Dragonstone and watched the dragons threading the sky like needles pulling day to mending. Arya stood at the end of the quay while the ships slid out, her hand up, not waving exactly, but not still. I'll bring you a shell from a beach that does not kill me, Yara called, cupping her hands to her mouth. Bring two, Arya called back. I'll lose one. She watched until the wake smoothed and then watched some more, because it is some people's habit to keep watching long after there is nothing left to see. In the north, summer moved as if it had agreed to do so in writing and could not be persuaded to hurry. Sansa stood at the edge of a new field in the new gift, where the ground that had once been left to the watch had been given to families who promised to keep the road clear and the ditches ditched. The wheat was never as tall as it was in the south, but it stood with a stubborn hands-on-hips stance she admired. She rode the line of a new canal with a mason who loved angles the way some men love songs, and she bent and put her hand in the water and felt the cold. The wall eats heat, the mason said. It is a hunger I can respect. Bran wheeled through the trees, not in the chair his sister had arranged with utter confidence in a carpenter's skill, but in a flock of crows that settled on the ridge beam of a longhouse and watched men eat soup with the quiet interest crows reserve for people they have decided are not entirely fools. He saw Jon in the south and saw him stand with his hand against a dragon's jaw and knew that the line that ran between their hearts was still there, if thinner, if stretched. He did not regret the stretch. He had learned that there is a kind of love that grows not with nearness but with the space it is allowed to fill. Ghost loped out of the treeline one evening with burrs in his fur and a leaf stuck absurdly behind one ear. Sansa knelt and took his face in both hands and said his name in a voice that was a remembered winter fire. He thumped his tail and sneezed and submitted to her fingers combing burrs from his coat with the resigned dignity of a king being relieved of a burden he does not absolutely hate. Jon came north when the leaves began to turn the color of stale wine. He rode alone with two cloaked men at a distance and a pack with bread and apples he had eaten without tasting. When Ghost came into the light above the last bend in the road, Jon stopped and slid out of the saddle and held his hands out. The wolf pushed his head into Jon's chest and wriggled like a dog, which he was not and was, and Jon laughed out loud for the first time in weeks, a sound that made the guards behind him exchange glances and decide the world was not about to end today. They walked under the wall. It was not as it had been. Nothing is, but it cast a shadow you could count on. Tormund met them at Eastwatch with meat on a skewer and a grin that had lost only 2 teeth since Jon last saw it. King, he said, and then, because he would not let that word lay its old weight on a friendship that had survived colder things, he clapped Jon on the back hard enough to bring water to his eyes. I've missed being hit, Jon said dryly, and Tormund laughed until he choked. They drank bad ale and good broth and talked about the way snow sounds when it falls on old snow. They argued without rancor about whether the free folk ought to pay any tax for using the gate in the summer when they brought down leather and bone needles and a humor so bleak it could make a southerner's toenails turn white. They agreed without talking about whether boys who liked boys and girls who liked girls could find a corner by the fire and be left alone. They sat and listened to the fire make the old language for warmth. On the road south again, Jon stopped at a cairn where the wind had a habit of curling around the same stone twice. He put his hand on the rock and said a name, not loudly because names are not flags, and then he stood and let the wind use his hair for practice. Gendry Baratheon, newly Lord of Storms, end by proclamation made in a voice that had carried across a field where men were still learning how to listen, came to the city with hands that still carried a smith's memory. He brought designs that made engineers blink and then grin. A way to pull water from the low marsh into a cistern uphill using nothing more than weight and rhythm. A new lip for the breakwater at Storm's End that would require fewer men to stand in harm's way when the storm face slapped. He stood in the council room and spoke in a voice that made boys straighten their backs because it sounded like a hammer striking true. Arya found him in the yard the day he arrived, striking a practice dummy with a stick and laughing when it refused to admire him. "Lord," she said, "because sometimes the knife goes in cleaner if you coat it with formalities." "Don't," he said, smiling. "Say it when you need something from me, not when you want to make a joke." "I always want something from you," she said, circling him. "What?" "The truth," she said, and he made a face as if she'd asked for a horse that could sing. "Truth is less fun than a title," he said. "Truth makes things last," she said. She stepped forward, quick as a blink, and took the stick from his hand and tapped the back of his knee with it. He sat down hard and swore and laughed again without malice. They sat together afterward and ate pears with the juice running down their wrists. When he asked if she would come see the sea the way it pounds against Storm's End, she shook her head and said, "There is a sea west that doesn't pound the same way. I'm not done with it yet." He nodded. He did not love her less for leaving. He had learned, not quickly and not without pain, that wanting a thing to be simple makes it false faster than wanting it to be beautiful. Dorne sent north its prince or princess, titles being always other people's problems. With a cask of wine so dry Tyrion accused it of having been made out of dust. She wore yellow in a shade that made the blue of her veins look like decoration and spoke as if making a fan. "The rivers are our coins," she said, long brown hands turning in the light. "If you would drink from them when your own hands are empty, you must promise not to dam them when your cup is full." "We'll not take what's yours," Daenerys said. "We'll not let anyone else take it either." "Words like stones," the Dornish ruler said, amused. "You throw them as if you expect them to land." "We do," Jon said. "We don't aim at your windows if we can help it." There were marriages. There were funerals. There were tepid feasts and two that sang in the memory for weeks afterward. One for the christening of a child named for a woman who had taught men another word for mercy, and one when Regal came down to drink from the river at dusk and let children lay hands on his foreleg while mothers fought the instinct to call them back and fathers calculated the risk and found, for once, that it felt like faith to let go. Drogon stood on the hill above and watched with an expression no one could read because dragons' faces are not for us. The rumor of a prince from the east ripened and then rotted, as rumors do when they cannot find hosts. A Lyseni courtier arrived with a velvet box and declared with ceremony that inside was a lock of hair belonging to the rightful heir of half a dozen thrones, give or take. Daenerys opened the box, looked at the hair, and shut it. "Send him a comb," she said. "Tell him if he can untangle this city, we will consider his claim." The courtier laughed and went away, and a month later a letter arrived from a polite young man with a ridiculous name saying he had reconsidered his career and decided to join a troop of mummers. Tyrion's laugh when he read it startled a bird out of the kitchen rafters. "May all would-be kings go into comedy," he said. "It is a way to teach men an honest kind of humility." A winter came that undid roofs and sent men out with ropes tied around their waists so they could find their way back from the privy. The city hunkered under blankets and ate soup that had bones in it for story and not much meat. The schools stayed open, and children were sent home with bread tucked under their cloaks and book pages in their boots because feet do not need literature but souls sometimes do. When the thaw came, it came fast and clumsy, breaking promises and then making new ones on the way down the slope. The river carried away 2 bridges and a man's temper. It left behind good silt and a mood that lasted a week and a half and then turned into ordinary life again. When the thaw reached the cliffs of Dragonstone, it woke something old. The mountain coughed, less an eruption than an old man clearing his throat, but enough that the sea turned black for a day and boys ran down with buckets to scoop up glass the color of night with stars frozen inside. The maesters from the citadel came with long faces and longer tongs and the secret pleasure of men allowed to do dangerous things in the daytime. They set up a shed on the lee side and wrote neat notes while Davos made sure no one fell into a fissure and never came out. Dragonglass is more fragile than pride. Sam lectured an apprentice who looked a little like he had when he was young. Hopeful and terrified, which are twin brothers that share a bed. But if you treat it like a friend you mean to keep, it will hold an edge that will shave the breath off a man. We don't need that now. We need blades that carve bread and sockets for wheels and ornaments that keep the city's purse heavy. I thought we would use it for statues, the boy admitted. For heroes. Sam sighed. Statues gather pigeons, he said. Better to make a gutter the pigeons avoid. The Iron Bank kept its word a while because numbers prefer to be obeyed when the air is good. When it pressed again, it did so with silk rather than rope. A small embargo here, a dry rumor there. Tycho returned with a less cheerful mouth and a letter he didn't want to show them, which meant he did at once. There are members of the bank, he said. Who would like your city to return to the way cities pay when they do not want to pay? Quickly, out of fear, Tyrion looked at Daenerys and she looked at Jon, and then both looked at Davos. Fear makes ships jump channels and wreck themselves, he said. Tell them the harbor is where the money is. They know, Tycho said. They are counting on the old habit men have of listening to the loudest, not the most correct. Brienne's watch found 3 men cutting relief lines in the market at night, the old sabotage you do when you want people to believe their own rulers are incompetent. She stood them up in the school and introduced them to children who were learning to count. One boy asked the oldest saboteur, "Do you like bread?" The man looked down at his hands and said he did. "Then don't cut the lines that bring us grain," the boy said matter-of-factly, and the man put his face in his hands and wept in a way that made his shoulders look huge and his faults look small. Grey Worm returned in the second spring with skin like dipped bronze and a quiet that lay on his men like a kind of polished armor. He brought back the story, that Noth had received them with its butterfly breeze, and that they had held to the rocks while the island slept and sung a song in a language that sounded like leaves talking. He brought 2 shells for Arya. "You will lose one," he said. And she laughed and lost one on purpose at the water's edge the next day, and a child found it and thought the world had handed him a treasure. He told Daenerys about slavers who had come and found no purchase and left with their sails smoking. He told her about men who had tried to give them gifts and been refused politely 3 times and then very impolitely once. He told her about a fever that had taken one of his boys and how they had wrapped him and sang and pushed him out into the sea on a door taken from an abandoned fishing hut. He did not ask permission to go again. He knew the world well enough now to understand which permissions are real and which are theater. She touched his cheek and said, "Go!" And he did. The Starry Company tried once more, because there are always men who prefer a simple lie to a complicated meal. Eldrick came out of his short sentence in a cell that had let him think and looked at the sky and decided it was too blue to make mischief under. He took a job at the school's door counting shoes and making children hand back the ones they had snatched from each other. And there are worse ways to serve a god than to manage small acts of justice with a broom. A woman no one had expected to matter did. Her name had been said in kitchens for years because she made a dumpling with herbs that tasted like fresh mornings. She began to sit at the council table once a month and speak for those who would never sit there. She carried a ledger in which she kept not numbers but the kinds of truth that make numbers behave. How many days a man can work on stew and how many on bread. The way a woman's heart breaks when the charter says the right thing and a clerk delays it with fear of his own signature. She did not flatter and did not feel flattered to be in the room. She made a motion with her hand when men grew too loud, and the room, surprisingly, obeyed. The charter had made a place for her before any of them knew a place would be needed. The Vale sent Robin Arryn with a horse that kept its heirs and a boy who had learned, to everyone's astonishment, to stay on it. Jon Royce walked at his stirrup and looked like a needle keeping thread from tangling. Robin had grown enough of a backbone to enjoy the notion that he wasn't a punchline anymore. He studied the school and the harbor and the way the Unsullied stood with their weight as if waiting for instructions from gravity itself, and he went home and began to ask for things. He asked for roads and valleys where only goats had learned to tread, and for drain fields and bogs that had killed men who thought they could stomp them into behaving. He asked for a woman who laughed at his jokes to marry him, and when she did not, he asked another and was refused again, and he learned to be refused with grace. In time, he asked fewer people to laugh at his jokes and more to join him in building a bridge, and that worked better. The Riverlands clucked and sighed and planted and argued and sent 7 representatives to sit in King's Landing. 1 for each of the old gods, which was old thinking made new, and Edmure T. Ully enjoyed them in a way that made his wife roll her eyes and then kiss him for the man he had become. The West found itself without the old lion's appetite and learned, with a rough humility, to be a house among houses. Davin Lannister served as castellan and as apology, and he did both jobs perhaps better than anyone expected. He came once to the city and stood very still in the market while 3 women called him names and then told them where to find the office that would hear their claims. When he returned the next year, one of those women sent him a jar of pickled fish. He ate it and told no one. Once, in the 7th year of the new tide, Drogon did not rise from his perch on the cliff when the wind came in strong off the sea. Daenerys climbed up to him and laid a hand on his chest and felt the engine in him like a drum. He opened one eye and looked at her with the deep, yellow patience of a creature who has learned he does not need to prove anything to anyone. She sat with him until the light changed and told him a story about a girl with purple eyes who had been given 3 stones and thought they were gifts and were, in fact, tasks. He huffed, a sound like a bellows near sleep, and she laughed into his scales. Regal found a mate or something like a mate, for with dragons such words are guesses, and vanished for 3 weeks. When he returned, he circled the hill and landed with a slowness that made hearts squeeze. He nosed at the trees and then nosed at Jon and made a sound that was not quite a purr and not quite a groan. The maesters argued in mutters and set down theories in neat lines and were wise enough to admit they did not know. The city watched the caves of Dragonstone with a new attention and then, after a while, returned to its breads and sums and left the dragons to their privacy. You can watch a door all night and miss the moment the hinge does its work. A shipment of obsidian went missing in a fog and turned up as knives in a market 2 countries away. Yara took 3 ships and returned with 4 captains' heads and a bill for rope, neatly itemized. "There's a lesson in this," she told the council. "Either you will pay it now and we will laugh about it later, or you will not and the sea will collect interest." She poured wine and toasted the school and stayed the night with a woman who taught letters and left in the morning looking like herself. When Sam returned from the Citadel with a book so heavy 2 boys had to carry it between them like a chest, Gilly and their boy walked beside him with an air of men who have decided not to be embarrassed by the way they love a man who loves books. "It isn't true," he confided to Daenerys later, sheepish. "That stories are light. They weigh more than armor, but we carry them anyway." "What did they call it?" she asked, touching the binding. A rich, practical leather, not ornate, which pleased her, without quite opening it. "Not a history," he said. "That implies a past. Not annals. That implies the need to be neat. We called it the Hours," he said, flushing at his own nerve. "Because that's how it's written. In little hours, like prayers. Put together, they make a life. They make a city. Then it tells the truth," she said. "Old enemies aged. The ones who had lived long enough to become tedious found, to their irritation, that the new order found them less interesting. A man who had once sworn to bring down the co-rulers with a whisper ended his days sitting in the sun outside his house, offering walnuts to children who had never heard his name. A woman who had sworn to bring the queen low made a better life for herself selling dye that did not run to people who enjoyed not having their skin stained for a week after washing. The Iron Bank tried one last neat pressure. They offered a prince from far away money enough to hire men enough to make trouble enough to tip the scales. The prince took the money and married a woman in the free cities instead and settled down to eat olives and write poetry that his wife smiled at. "Sometimes the gods are lazy and that is to our advantage," Tyrion said, and Tycho did not disagree. He had learned to enjoy bread he had not paid for with someone else's hunger. In the 14th year, when the trees on the hill threw good shade and the charter was a habit the city wore without thinking, a woman from the Summer Isles arrived with a gift. A drum carved from a wood none of them had seen, with a skin that made a sound like rain on a tiled roof. She played in the square without asking permission from anyone, and after a while children gathered, and then their parents, and then the men who thought they were too old for such things. The rhythm taught the feet something new, and that night in the council room the old men tapped it under the table and found they spoke more quickly and less grandly. "What will we be when we are gone?" Daenerys asked Jon very late, under a sky that had chosen to be generous. "What we are now," he said. "Not in stone, in ways. Ways can be broken, she said. They can be mended, he said. They can be used to walk farther than the last time. She lay with her head on his shoulder and listened to his heart. The dragons snored in the distance like weather deciding what mood to take. She thought of a girl once wrapped in a horse's hide against a cold she had not believed could exist. She thought of a woman who had stood in a hall and been told that a chair made of swords was what she wanted. She thought of bread torn on a step and a river swallowing fire, of a school, of a charter that had learned to scowl and smile, of a boy's question about bread and a man's weeping, of a wolf with a leaf in his ear, of a brother under a tree who had taught the air around him to be attentive. In the mornings she walked the market with no one before her and listened to the way the city said her name without fear. In the afternoons she sat with the council and made fewer speeches than she had years ago and found that more got done. In the evenings she rode, sometimes with John, sometimes alone, sometimes not riding at all but walking with the dragon's shadows rolling over her like a language she had learned and could speak without thinking. And when the next trouble came, as it always does, because stories do not end so much as travel, King's Landing stood its ground. It did not tremble when ships appeared where they shouldn't. It did not break when a man lied loudly enough to make his own head ring. It did not bow when the wind tried to push it over. It held, with the stubborn grace of a chair made by a man who loves his craft too much to let anyone else sit poorly in it. They were not saints. They were not gods. They were men and women who had learned, with sweat and hunger and laughter and loss, to be enough. They did not keep the peace by the force of fear or by the marriage bed alone. They kept it by the habit of feeding and of listening, by the art of putting weight where it needed to be and pulling it away when it threatened to crush. On a night in early autumn, Sam finished another stack of pages and set down his pen and looked at Gilly and their boy and said, "Do you think they will remember us?" And Gilly wiped ink off her cheek with the back of her hand and said, "They'll remember themselves, if we're lucky." And he thought that was the answer to more questions than the one he'd asked. He carried the new pages up the hill to the shelf and slid them in beside the first book. The leather scratched his fingers. The smell of glue was oddly comforting. He went outside afterward and stood with his hands in his pockets and listened to the way the city settled at night. It sounded like an animal finding a good place to sleep. Under the trees, Jon and Daenerys sat with their backs to the same trunk, their shoulders just touching. The bark pressed its own truth into their spines. They did not speak. They had said enough for a while. Above them, the leaves argued with the wind and won, then lost, then won again. Drogon's breath rolled warm over the hill. Rhaegal stretched and shook one wing as if to test the air. Ghost, old now, dreamed waffling dreams at Jon's boot, paws twitching in some chase that would never end and did not need to. The stars came out, more modest than the men who named themselves after them. And the city breathed the way a living thing breathes, in and out, without hurry, knowing itself. And somewhere west of maps, a ship's sail took a wind it had not counted on and turned its face toward a place no one had named yet. And the woman at its prow smiled and did not tell anyone why.